Today I'm going to show you my workflow for better texture rendering in Substance Painter, Blender, Unreal, Cinema4D, etc. And that is using UDIMs. UDIMs is basically a better way to get more texture resolution on your objects. So to just give you a quick demonstration of that before I show you the bells and whistles, I have this scene in Cinema4D of these two dice. They are effectively the same dice. Yes, they're a little dense for dice, but they're going to help me prove a point. So if we go ahead and look at these in my viewport preview, they look pretty similar. But if I go ahead and click on this first one that's forward to the camera and we get in nice and close, we can see here that we have some weird subdivision happening in our render. Versus, if I go ahead and move over to my other dice, we can see here that it's a little bit cleaner. The reason why this is happening is there's a couple things that could be affecting this, but for this example, a lot of it is coming down to texel density. Texel density is basically how large the image of a polygon takes up on our UV map and our material maps. So to quickly demonstrate this, I'm going to take this UV checker material and apply it to both of my dice here. And what you're going to notice is that as I preview my UV checker, when it decides to load, we can see here that the grid on our dice faces is taking up some amount of space on this 3D geometry. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at this F0 and notice how large this is on this face right here. Versus, if I go to my other dice, we can see that this grid pattern is much tinier. But if we zoom in nice and close, we can see that it's still very sharp and very crisp relative to our 3D camera. That is effectively UDIMs in a nutshell. We're basically able to get more resolution on our image because each of our polygons is taking up more space on our UV tile. The way that works is UDIMs and UV tiling. So if I go ahead and zoom out and take a look at my dice, we can see that the grid obviously is differently spaced. And if I go ahead and shift click on my UV map on my UV tiled version, we can see here that I have all these tiles of my little grid pattern for my object. But if I zoom in on the primary UV tile, this is what you typically use for a standard material in pretty much any 3D software. Where UDIMs comes in is you will offset a material and it will take up more resolution for each polygon. So if I go ahead and close this preview and hold shift and double click on my other texture, we can see here that this UV packing takes up the standard UV tile. Let's go ahead and put this right there. And we'll go ahead and preview this guy right here. We can see that there is definitely a difference between how much space this UV tile takes up versus all these other spaces. That is UDIMs. We're basically offsetting polygons in a tiling method to get more texel resolution, more texel density. That's the word. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into Blender. In a completely fresh Blender scene, I'm going to go ahead and import a generic D20 because it's going to be the easiest way to demonstrate UDIMs. Click and drag, drop in my FBX, and let's go to my object and local view. There's my dice. Looks cool. And if I go to my face mode, we can see that we have some polygons. We're going to try and UV unwrap this. So first off, when we go to our UV edit tab, this is where we're going to be able to see our object in our viewport. And then we also have our UV tile. Now, this is all one single tile. And when you look at your UV tab in Blender, you're going to look at this one tab. Now, if you want to visualize UDIMs, what you can do is go up to your sort of viewport layout here. We can see that we have our different tiling option. Now, you can go to different behind the scenes movies and see how like Pacific Rim will use 1,000 UDIMs. We can just go ahead and add maybe 10 on the X, and if we go ahead and zoom out, we can see that now we have 10 tiles across on the X. And then if we go back to that view and we look at Y, we can see that now we have 20 tiles. The reason why this is important is because this helps us visualize where all of our UDIMs are. The most important thing is that you want your polygons to take up some amount of space on each of these tiles for your textures. You should know do not put anything on a seam for your UV tiles. Everything must live within these thicker grid lines, so then you can have a very clean distribution of your UDIMs. Now, if I look at my geometry here, we can see that everything is still connected. So what I want to do is separate the parts of my model, whether you're making a character, a prop, a dice. I want to separate whatever I want onto each of these separate materials. There's 1,000 ways to lay out your UVs and your UDIMs, but I'm going to go ahead and start by selecting the seams that I want. I'm going to go ahead and change my clipping start by 0.01. So I'm going to zoom in and select every edge. I'm going to go to edge mode, edge, and I'm going to edge mode, select every single edge, and basically make it its own face, its own UV island. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick.
2,000 years later.
All right, I think I'm done. So I have every single edge that I want for my different faces and different seams. So I'm going to right click and go ahead and hit mark seam. And when I hit A on the keyboard, we can see that all of my faces are still very much in their own UV island. Now what I'm going to do is go to UV and UV unwrap. And now we can see that my UV tile has now separated each face from itself. There's no interconnected points. So now what I can do from here is start laying out my UV grid. To do that, what I'm going to do is switch to face mode. I'm going to select a face, hit L, and then I'm going to hit G and drag it into a new UV tile. Now from here, I can go up to UV, and I'm going to go to UV and pack islands. Now under pack islands, what you'll be able to see is that there's this UV closest UDIM right here. So let's go ahead and hit pack, and it's going to fill up this geometry to the size of this UV tile. And it's going right up to the edge, which is perfectly fine for this tutorial. For the rest of these, we're going to pretty much do the same thing. Now, at the time of this tutorial, I am not aware of any plugins or tools or methods in Blender that will allow you to lay out all this stuff individually. So I use another software called Rizom UV, and I'll show you that in a second. But basically, if you're working with just a couple tiles, you could very well just go ahead and select your face, go to pack islands, closest UDIM, etc., and just do this however much. This is a lot for a single D20, and there's 20 here, so I'm going to show you how I would set this up in Rizom. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and go back to object mode. I'm going to export this, so file, export, and FBX. Set this to selected, and I'll call this UDIM Tut D20. Cool. Selected object, FBX, and then Rizom. Open it up, Rizom. This is Rizom UV, and basically you can take a mesh, geometry, whatever else, and drop it in, and hey look, we have our geometry all set up here. Now, I'm lazy, so if you look in the lower portion of my viewport, I have this UDIM tile, so I want 20 tiles. So let's just go with 1, 2, 3, 4 on the X, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the Y. So now we have a distribution of 20 tiles, because 4 times 5 is 20. And if I go ahead and hit pack, it will go ahead and equalize and automatically pack all of my UVs across every single tile. Great. I can hit Control S to save it, close that, and then I can go back to my FBX that I just exported, import this into Blender, go ahead and drop that in, and now we have this new dice. I'm going to go ahead and take this old one, hit M on the keyboard, and we'll set this to old, and we don't need this anymore. Awesome. So now when I go ahead and hit tab and go to face mode, we have a nice even distribution of all of my UV tiles across this object. Now my preview in Blender is different from what the UV tile is already set up to do. So you should know that this little viewport view is only like it's a helper. So I'm just going to set this to 5 and 4 and 4 and 5, excuse me. And now we have a cool visualizer for our UDIMs. Awesome. Now, before we go any further, it is worth mentioning that you actually don't need to do any fancy setup to prepare your models to use UDIMs. The number one thing is you just have to make sure that each of your UV tiles, whether you're using squares for your textures or some other resolution, I recommend squares, you need to make sure that every offset is relative to the size of the first UDIM tile. So if this is just a square, it should be offset by 1. So this UV UDIM tile is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and it goes all the way over to 10, and then it would go to 10, 11, 12, etc. Now, if you're having a hard time visualizing this, what you can do is go to New Texture, and under this new texture, we'll call this Blender UDIM. Let's set this to 4096 by 4096, and then we're going to tick on Tiled. And when we do this, we can see that our UV changes, but we can see that now we have this UDIM 001. Now from here, we can hit the N key on the keyboard, and we can see that under our Image tab, we have this UDIM Tiles workflow or window. And if we hit the plus sign, we can see that we're adding more tiles to our texture that we're working on in Blender. Now I'm going to do my textures in Substance Painter, but you can use this to help visualize your UDIMs in Blender. So we're going to start at 02, and we're going to, let's just say, add 20, 19, sure, let's add 19. And it'll take a second because now we're adding a bunch of textures. Cool. So now it did add a bunch of UDIMs to the left and right. Basically, when we added all these UDIM tiles, it just went from 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10, 11, 20, etc. The way we set it up in Rizom, I found it doesn't really matter. I just happen to work this way, and so far no one has screamed at me yet. So use whatever your art director intends. All that being said, let's go ahead and take this dice and bring it into Substance Painter now. We have Substance Painter open, and we're going to go ahead and take our D20, drop it into Substance, and before you hit the OK New Project, let's go ahead and set our document resolution. I'm just going to use 2K for now because I don't want to blow up my computer for the tutorial while we are recording. And we need to make sure that Use UV Tile Workflow is ticked on. Click this one. Just don't forget that if you're trying to use UDIMs. All that being said, you don't really need to change anything else. Let's go ahead and click OK. And it's going to load up our dice. And if we zoom out of our UV preview, we can see that we have all of our tiles for each of our faces. And we're going to go up to the bake option just to quickly do a quick bake. 2K, use low poly, bake texture, and we let this go.
6.5 hours later.
So with the bake done, let's go ahead and look at our dice preview. Nothing's really fancy or changed, but we can go ahead and go to our smart preview, smart materials, and I don't know, let's just take this like gold damage, drop it on, and let's just take a look and see what it looks like. That looks like a gold dice. Looks pretty sweet, and when we get up nice and close, we get all those nice crisp details there. We get some metal edge wear that's built into the smart material, some smooth edges, and I'd say that looks pretty good because we can get up nice. Like obviously you're not going to get this close, but you can get up pretty close and personal. Now that being said, I am going to use the smart material I made for my dice preview that you saw at the beginning of this tutorial. We're going to see if it works. Mainly the reason why we're using this preset is because I don't want to put the dice numbers on again. So we're just going to do that, and hey look, it worked. Awesome. So now we have all of our dice faces pretty much set up, and fortunately, because this is a 2K image across each of our dice faces, this number is taking up a large portion of every single UV tile. So we're pretty much ready and good to go. We don't need to change anything else because we've already set up the UDIM workflow in Substance. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-E and save this somewhere on my computer. Text, UDIMs, dice. 001. Cool. Double click that, select folder, and we're going to hit export. And it's going to export 20 texture sets for every single, or 20 texture sets, one texture set for every single tile. Open output directory. We got a lot of stuff. Now, fortunately, we do not have to assign materials for every single number. Blender and Cinema and Unreal have special ways of reading UDIMs, so let's talk about that now. Back in Blender, we have our D20. We haven't really made any changes to this. I'm going to go ahead and clear this material because we don't want to work with that material. We want to work with our own brand new material that we just made. So we have this text UDIMs Dice 1, and very conveniently, when you go to the Open button and we go ahead and select the UDIM for our image, it will take a second. And it will load every single tile automatically. It just automatically detects that it is a UDIM, which is sweet, which is cool. But the problem is that if we go ahead and preview our material, let's go ahead and make a new material for this dice. Go to our shader editor over here, switch this to shader. And if I go ahead and select my material that we just made, we'll drop in just the base color for now, and we can go ahead and pipe this in. It's not going to work. It's going to be like 19 everywhere, all over the dice. What's going on? Well, what's happening is that we have not said that this image is a UDIM tile or a UDIM image, UDIM set. So we need to go to this drop-down menu right here and set this to UDIM tiles. And it will now assign every single face to the corresponding sort of tile that it needs to be, which is awesome because I'm lazy and I don't want to deal with this stuff. So again, being lazy, if you wanted to set this up in Blender, I will just use Node Wrangler. That is a plugin that you can enable in the preferences. We'll select our primary principal material and hit Control-Shift-T, and we will select the first base color, hold Control and select the first emissive, hold Control, select the first height, hold Control, metallic, hold Control, normal, hold Control, roughness, and that should be good to go. Import that, and very conveniently it imports everything, but every single texture is still set up to a single image. So we need to go to our texture sets for our base color, UDIM tiles. It's going to load up a bunch of textures. Might take a second whenever you do this, so we're going to go ahead and use this as we need to. UDIMs and UDIMs. And there we go. Now I have our UDIMs set up in Blender for our object. Now I'm sure you're here for the other workflow, so let's go ahead and talk about Cinema4D. In Cinema, I'll go ahead and click and drag and drop in my dice. Select my dice, hit S, preview, awesome, cool. Go to our materials, load up a standard redshift material, and we're going to drop in our first base color. Now, from here, we're just going to pipe this into the base color like so and preview, and that does not look correct. What you have to do for Cinema4D for UDIMs to work is that you need to go to the path and hit end on the keyboard, or you just have to go to the end of the path, and you see this 00 or 1001. You need to delete that. Oh, don't delete the material. Delete this. Hold shift and arrows to get rid of that. And then, oh my goodness. And then after base color, we need to type dot. Oh my God, what is happening? Cinema, stop it. Oh my God, what is it? It's not letting me type. Holy shit. It's not letting me type. What the
12 seconds later.
Okay. You type UDIM at the end of those numbers and it replaces it. And preview's not looking good. But if you go to your Redshift render view and then drop this in and preview that, load, there we go. Got our UDIM tiles. Sweet. So now we have UDIM set up in Cinema4D, and from here what you can do is do it all for your normal, your roughness, metallic, etc. I'm not going to do that because we're going to finish this up in Unreal. So in a completely fresh Unreal project, the first thing we need to do if we want to set up UDIMs is go to Edit and then Project Settings, and under our Project Settings we're going to go ahead and type Virtual Texture, and we need to make sure we turn on Enable Virtual Texture Support. If you have not turned this on, you will have to restart Unreal and you will have to recompile shaders, so it may take some time, so let's go ahead and restart.
20 minutes later.
Unreal is restarted. We're ready to import our static mesh. So let's go ahead and find our object, UDIM tut D20, drop you in, Don't need to set up anything here. We can just go ahead and hit import. Now from here, we'll right click in the empty space, go to new folder, and we'll call this text D20. Sure. Double click that. And then we're going to go to our text UDIMs, and we're going to select the first one for every single set. So our base color, our height, our normal, our roughness, and our metallic, and drop this in. Now, if you are unfamiliar with setting up materials in Unreal using Substance Painter, I do recommend using the EXR workflow. I'll leave a link to my other tutorial on how I set that up, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to use basic PNGs for now. We have the different texture sets already loaded in Unreal. It loaded everything by default because we enabled virtual textures. So when we double click on this, we can see here that it's actually a very, very large image, but we're actually just going to only need to set up one material. So what we can do is we can go to our D20, drop this into my scene, hit F. It's very tiny. We'll set this to like 50, 50, and 50, so it's much larger. And now from here, we're going to go to our Redshift standard, delete all this nonsense that it brought in, and then text D20, drop in our drop in. We're not worry about our height right now. We are gonna do our metallic. We're gonna do our normal. We're gonna do our roughness, and I'm doing this super quick and dirty. Hit save. Now we can go ahead and close this material. Sure, whatever. And if we go ahead and preview this, it does not look right. What's going on? Aha, it's because I plugged in my, oh, the base color is freaking out. Aha, there we go. It just took a second to load. That was weird. It was freaking out. Thanks, Unreal. But yeah, now we have our UDIM texture set up in Unreal. And if you were to try and get the displacement in that, that's a story for another tutorial because I've not set that stuff up yet. But that's how you use UDIMs in Unreal and Blender and Cinema4D and Redshift. Primarily Redshift. So, that's it. That's the tutorial. UDIMs are set up. Enable virtual texture support. I hope you learned something. If you did, let me know in the comment section down below. Questions, comments, concerns, whatever else. Comment section is down there for that. And in the description, if you want to reach out to me and ask me anything, you can do that in the description somewhere down there. I'm sure there's links for that. Okay. Until next time, as always, final tip. 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Make some gains. Goodbye, my friends. Bye.